Claire's the girl I told you about. The one living in my guest house because her parents can't afford anything else right now. Gummy feet?
Thanks, but I don't eat sugar.
And I don't eat feet.
Welcome to the Graveyard Slot, where we talk about movies past their prime time.
Here, we revisit old favorites with a fresh perspective to see if they deserve more credit or if they should stay buried. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Sohini, and today we're talking about the Clique. Before we get started, we want to encourage whoever might be listening to donate to ongoing efforts to help the people of Gaza, Congo, and Sudan. Throughout the year, we've mentioned various organizations contributing to such efforts, and today we'd like to highlight Funds for Gaza and Voluntarism in Action.
Both have compiled a list of fundraisers accepting donations for Gaza and Congo. Their posts will be linked in the episode description, and we encourage you to check them out, share, and donate if you can this holiday season.
So today we're talking about the Clique. Based on Lacey Harrison's book of the same name, the Clique follows new girl Claire Lyons as she attempts to join the popular girls group consisting of Massey, Alicia, Dylan, and Kristen. There's just one problem. They hate her guts.
They do.
The movie was released in 2008, and it was directed by Michael Lembeck, who has an interesting filmography, I would say.
One way to put it.
Some of the movies that he's been involved in include The Santa Claus 2 and 3,
Wow.
Tooth Fairy, and Sharpay's Fabulous Adventure.
Now there's a resume you can brag about.
And the movie was written by Liz Tegelar, who, among other things, has been involved in TV shows like Once Upon a Time, Revenge, Bates Motel, and Little Fires Everywhere.
Wow.
I also have to mention that Tyra Banks seemed quite heavily involved in the movie, considering it was partly produced by her production company.
For better or for worse.
To what extent her influence spread, I'm not sure, but she was in the DVD extras. That's burned into my memory. So take from that what you will.
Yeah, she was involved enough.
She was there.
That is what you can say about Tyra Banks, yes. She was there. We wanted to discuss this movie because it's exactly the kind of movie that would be overlooked, if not outright disparaged, without even a consideration of what the movie is attempting to tackle. It's one thing to critique the movie and another to do it not in its own context. So today we'll attempt to do just that and hopefully figure out if this straight-to-DVD movie deserves more credit after all. But I mean, you know what? I can't even critique the critics for saying some shit about this movie because there's not a one that I can find.
Yeah.
So I kind of picked some fun ones from Letterboxd. I have to kick things off with a classic TGS review. This one's from Angie. The Clique has more cultural significance than Citizen Kane. When I saw this review, I was like, oh my god, I have found gold.
That was so on brand.
But I have a more substantial one from Evie Wonder that reads, an examination of class conflict following the 2008 financial crisis, a period piece, a character study, and a thrilling teenage melodrama all in one. Feels like a suburban New York version of Mulholland Drive. Iconic does not begin to even describe it.
I love that.
Yeah, those are just a couple of my favorites. What about you? Did you find a critic or?
Absolutely not. No critics to speak of for this movie. So I also went looking for some audience reviews, and one that I found on Rotten Tomatoes said this. Mine is a negative one, so I'm not going to name and shame. It said, the we're girls, so we're going to be snotty brats to each other thing is cliche enough in itself, but this was an ongoing war of subterfuge and sociopathic, emotionless loyalty based on what each person was gaining, mainly sociable interest. This was exhausting for me to watch, but a 10 to 14-year-old girl might like it.
You know what? I'll give them this. They got it. They got the point of the movie, at least. It didn't completely fly over their heads.
I think this audience member did what critics would have done had they even given the chance to this movie, which is bring their own biases, and they are
telling on themselves.
yeah, and not just that, but they're basically projecting, because the
Yes,
whole we're
exactly.
girls so we're gonna be snotty brats is not what the movie is saying. They are exaggerating the female experience, and that's the point of the movie. And I guess that's the perspective I'm taking going into this episode today, because the overriding opinion seems to be that the movie has nothing to say, it's superficial, it's materialistic, and to some degree I agree, but I don't think it's completely as shallow as they're all accusing it of being.
To every degree, I disagree. I think this movie has so much to say. But more importantly, I want to touch on something you said that I completely agree with, and is my problem with a lot of reviews. Whenever people bring up elements to a story that they assume is inherently bad and not as a tool within that story to accomplish whatever it is they're trying to accomplish. Saying all of these things about the movie in this review, how it's an ongoing war of subterfuge and blah 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 blah, it doesn't say anything, good or bad. That's not a critique or a review. You're reiterating the movie, but like, what does that mean? How does that make this movie good or bad? We're just supposed to hold the same belief system that this depiction or this element or whatever makes this story inherently bad. That's why as I was reading this review that you found, I was like, yeah, you got it, but you didn't get it. Anyway, while I don't know this movie that well, you have had a storied history with this movie.
Yeah, it extends to my middle school days.
When you were at OCD.
That's a terrifying image you put in my head. I was actually introduced to the book series when I was in middle school. The first couple books I really loved and reread a lot. And then when the movie came out, I really loved it as an adaptation of one of my favorite childhood series. And so I watched it so many times. It was a huge comfort watch for me, except in the past couple years when I haven't really been watching it. So it was really interesting to go back to it after being so familiar with it, because I felt like I knew it by heart, but I was also seeing it in a new light.
Yeah, I am not familiar with it at all. I didn't read the books, but I did read the spin-off books, The Alphas.
Right.
And loved it so much. So much. I don't remember much from it. But yeah, I also enjoyed like stories of its kind.
I guess we were both under Lacey Harrison's spell at some point when we were kids.
Yeah. But yes, let's jump into it. And as always, we'll be discussing this movie chronologically. Would you like to start us off?
I would be honored. We start off with Massey screaming, crying, throwing up. No. Massey is incensed about having to miss a party to greet the Lyonses, who she is being informed by her parents will be staying at their guest house from now on. Immediately, I love the theatrics. From the intense angle to the exaggeration in Massey's language to the frankly absurd picture of her parents hovering over her bed like that. There's an element of absurdism to this movie that I don't think I noticed as a younger viewer, but that now I really appreciated, and it certainly wasn't there in the book.
Really?
Yeah, I reread the first couple pages. That's how as far as I got. This scene was actually so much more serious in the book. It was all more straightforward, the discussion. You know, the playful wordplay that Massey has and the witty comebacks, it wasn't quite there in the opening scene in the book. So I really like that they immediately lean into this tone in the movie.
Yeah, I love this opening scene as well. But actually, before Massey starts screaming, I love the title card. It's pretty, simple. It's not much, but it reminded me of Legally Blonde, the opening scene for that.
I love that comparison. I was recently watching this video. I think it was about the opening of Legally Blonde, and they were talking about how it's so girly without disparaging being girly, and I think that applies to this movie too. I think this movie also does a really great job of embracing traditional femininity and what it means to be a young girl who loves girly things without being judgmental about it. And they do it from start to finish, like even from the title card, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I do love, even the color is pink, obviously, but also the fact that it's plaid, and the look of the title itself, like the font and the color and the effect used, is very fitting for the exact community they're touching on in this movie, like the class and everything.
You mean rich people?
Yes, rich white people specifically. And I don't have like a fashion background or history, or I don't know what anthropology. So I don't know if this translates over time, honestly, but for its time at least, I know that those patterns and colors and looks were very heavily associated with a very specific group of people, this like preppy style. So I really liked how well that fit with the movie and, everything.
Yeah, class is definitely a very prominent theme in the movie, and they don't shy away from it. The fact that it's even reflected in the title card is amazing.
Yeah. But Massey decides if she is missing the party, then everyone has to miss the party. Which I think is just such a great way to establish her character, her desires, even her insecurities, and her societal power. That this is even a thing that she can do. And we see this in the 4-way phone call that she gets on.
Yeah, she calls her friends and spreads rumors about the party host to also get them to ditch the party. This is such an interesting way to regain her power and her agency. Whenever a situation is taken out of her hands, you can see her tackle it in a way that is so
strategic.
Yeah, it's so strategic and so particular to this kind of character who places so much importance in social currency and her social standing.
Yeah, and this conversation between her and her friends does such a good job at explaining the social currency that they play with in this world. And it just does such a good job of establishing the world. Like, this is what matters in this world. But yeah, I really like this 4-way phone call. I was actually surprised by how well they read as friends. I went into this movie kind of expecting the kind of friendship where the leader, Massey, was just always mean to her friends and they all just followed her while hating her guts. But here and throughout the movie, they kind of are like real friends.
Yeah.
They're shitty people often and sometimes mean to each other, but pretty genuine friends anyway.
I am so glad that you brought that up. I think this friendship aspect is what kind of sets this movie apart from something like Mean Girls and leans it more towards something like Bratz, because they genuinely like each other. They're just too insecure to notice that. And the way that it's portrayed in the movie is very well done, I think.
Yeah, and I really like that they're still mean and they fight and stuff, and it's not like
Yeah.
one or the other, it's not mutually exclusive. Just because Massey is this, leader and she's mean and she's bitchy, they do kowtow to her and stuff, but they are all actually equal friends. They're just, like you said, really insecure about it. And these two things can be true. And I think that complexity in friendships and female friendships is so rare to find, because a lot of the times stories often lean into a very one-dimensional take that's like, oh, this is a completely toxic friendship and we hate the leader girl or whatever. I just love the way they depict it in this movie.
Yeah, and as a result of that, the other girls have their own personalities as well that shine through. It's not just like mindless followers. They have minds of their own, and that makes it all the more interesting that they are following Massey, whether willingly or not. After this, Massey is making no effort to get ready for the Lions' arrival, so her mom tells her that if she attends dinner, she can go to the end of the party. This scene takes place by their indoor pool. There's this, I guess it's like a wide shot where we're looking at these characters from across the pool almost, and they're kind of dwarfed by their surroundings. And the characters look really small in comparison to this lavish, luxurious surroundings. It does a good job of establishing the setting, but also the enormous wealth of these families. I don't know, maybe there is something more to it, but I kind of wish they had leaned into the absurdity again and maybe done a little bit more with it. I'm going to talk about Confessions of a Shopaholic again. I just love that one shot where Rebecca is dwarfed by these giant decorations at the mall, and it's a physical manifestation of her emotional state.
I don't know if this is what you meant, but I think I noticed something similar when they're in the kitchen, when the mom drags her there and is telling her off, and they're at opposite ends of the island.
Yeah,
but the island
yeah.
is gigantic.
Huge.
And it is quite exaggerated by the way it's shot. So yeah, I definitely see what you mean. And you're right, that is a great way of communicating more than just what it seems on the surface.
Yeah, it's reflecting visually the rift between Massey and her mom, the fact that they're on opposite sides of the argument. And also the table. When Claire goes to talk to Massey after Massey embarrasses her at the pool, she's standing by their front door and she looks so small compared to the giant house. And I really liked that because, again, it's like a reflection of her emotional state, how small and insignificant and inadequate she feels in the face of the family's wealth and their power and their status. I guess with this shot by the pool, and also we get these shots of the other girls' houses, like the exterior, but we never see the contrast between them and their surroundings. I guess, I mean, it goes to show that they fit in perfectly well because they're rich, but maybe this is symptomatic of a bigger issue that I have with the movie, which is that all the consequences and all the lessons seem to be for Claire mostly.
Yeah.
There's a little something for Massey to learn, but ultimately she never faces the consequences of her actions, and neither do the other girls. And so I guess this is kind of reflected in the way that they and their surroundings are shot, because there's nothing negative. They're perfectly comfortable and they fit in.
Yeah. But Claire and her family arrive, and Massey gets all dressed up for it, and it shows that this is a significant moment for her. Like, she chooses to put on armor for it. And again, we see what is of value in her world, like what she sees and people around her sees as putting on armor.
Yeah. I really like the dissonance between Massey's words and actions. She couldn't care less about the alliances, but she makes an effort to look her best when she's greeting them anyway. It just goes to show how important fashion is for her as a way of self-expression. Yes, she's materialistic, but it's also an outlet for creativity. So when she meets someone like Claire, who doesn't seem to give a second thought to how she looks, friendship with her immediately seems that much more challenging. But yeah, I think fashion is a huge technique that they use in the movie and a huge thing for the characters in terms of the way they approach it, how much they care about it, how they use it, because we also see Claire slowly becoming more and more interested or at least aware of her clothes. And I especially love this one shot when Massey looks at herself in the mirror and she looks nervous. And you can tell that in dressing up, it's like she's putting on armor. And I just love the use of fashion for her character, especially.
Same. I loved the fashion in this movie. Like I said, I didn't remember this movie well at all. And for some reason, I had it in my head that it was almost kitschy, like very Disney Channel, A Million Layers kind of thing. But no, the fashion is so well done. Like whether or not you personally like it, it's fitting for the characters, for the world, for the story they're trying to tell. And they use it in a really interesting way. I think what's also really interesting here is that it's not just a matter of, oh, fashion is an interest that Massey has, and if Claire were also interested in fashion, then they would have something in common and maybe they could bond. It's that for Massey and for people in her world, it's not just an interest, it's a requirement, it's knowledge. It's, again, social currency. There are social economic factors. And that's exactly it. Like, it's not just a matter of knowing fashion. It's the ability to wield it. And that ability is not open to everybody. So it's like another take on the whole, like, knowledge is not free kind of thing. Technically, yes, and it should be. But, like, that's just not the world we live in kind of thing. But yeah, so I really love their use of fashion as well.
Absolutely agreed.
But Massey, you know, comes out and meets Claire and the family. And I really like this scene because we see them sizing each other up so clearly. And it's not just Massey being rude and Claire being confused or whatever. Like, Claire's brain is working.
Given Claire's sneaky tendencies later on in the movie, I can definitely see that it's not just, oh, innocent little Claire doesn't know what's going on. I'm sure she already has an idea that she's been kind of thrown in the lion's cage. Which is
ironic.
Ironic.
Yeah. But yeah, it's present for the entire movie, but it's definitely apparent here that a lot of what these characters either have or don't have is etiquette. So Claire doesn't have the etiquette that is appropriate for this setting. She, takes a picture at the dinner table with Flash, which is like inappropriate in any context, but especially here. And even the charm that she gives Massey is a silver charm for her gold charm bracelet. But it just emphasizes how out of place she and her behaviors are. And I really love how often this comes up throughout the movie for all different characters and for all different settings as well. Like the same way that Claire doesn't possess the etiquette for OCD or whatever, sometimes you see people from Massey's world also miss out on the knowledge of like what's appropriate for, maybe someone of Claire's class or something.
That's a really great point. And to add on to that, it's kind of similar to what you were saying about fashion being knowledge. Massey is very much familiar with what kind of etiquette is appropriate, but she ignores it. She grabs the plate from under Claire's dad while he's still eating for her own selfish purposes. And she can do that because even though she's a kid in that scenario, she's the kid of the rich parents in their giant house. And at least in her perspective, she has the power to breach etiquette in any way that she sees fit.
But I mean, even something as simple as Massey throwing out her little digs and Claire not really reacting appropriately, like either taking it at face value or acting like she doesn't understand or whatever. Whereas like in her world, I'd imagine even like adults in her world are like throwing out these little quips left and right and knowing how to like reply in kind. Even that kind of stuff is like showing this disconnect between them.
Right, yeah. And Massey's intent on still going to that party, and so she grabs the plates from the guests and her mom follows her, and they're about to like have this whole exchange when Claire comes in and overhears about the party. And so Massey immediately fakes being sick.
It's in this scene that I clocked that Claire is already so sassy from the beginning. Even if it is just her kind of being outgoing and upbeat. Like when she tells Massey, hope it's not anything serious. She's just being nice. But it kind of sounds like she's making a dig. And maybe it's just because it's within this movie, so I expect it of these characters, even though Claire is like kind of on the outside of it. So she's just acting like a normal human, but maybe I'm like too much in Massey's head. I bet this is what's happening in Massey's head. She is like every day Claire and her stupid fucking smart mouth, and Claire's just like, hope you get better soon. But I hear it.
I was really surprised when she was all up for going to a party full of strangers. I was like, wow, Claire, you are a more confident girl than I ever was. I wouldn't be totally unsurprised if she is aware, but she's imposing anyway. Like, not in a mean way, but she is intent on being friends with Massey. So after the whole scene where they greeted each other, I would understand if she's like, okay, I'm going all in. I'm gonna try my best, She's just doing the wrong things, though, in Massey's perspective. So.
I also want to touch on the fact that she is very self-assured. I mean, that's also part of why she's such a target in this movie. Like, Claire, if you were just a little bit shyer. But so Claire asks her mom to go shopping. She's honestly kind of acting in a very similar way to how Massey did with her parents. They're just doing it within the different contexts of their circumstances and class and relationships. Like, Claire saying TJ Maxx isn't gonna cut it here is the same temperament and selfishness as Massey's demands of her parents, just like within the constraints of their respective circumstances, which I loved. It's a great parallel that I really enjoyed. Like Massey, for example, asking for, I don't know, a Lambo from her parents is the same degree of outrageous that is Claire asking for, I don't know, a Gucci purse. I don't know brands.
I love that you went with a Lambo, though, considering they're 12. That is especially outrageous. That's a really great point.
And she says, it's like designer everything here. And I don't get it, because like it's not like her mom is gonna bring her to shop designer. I get that they're children. But Claire's demands here to me was outrageous, and I just don't know what she thinks is gonna happen.
I guess the implication is that let's try to look a little bit more polished, even if we can't afford designer. But regarding what you said about the parallel between her demands and Massey's demands, I thought that was really interesting. It again brings to mind the way that the story treats the two of them, because ultimately Claire is made to feel bad about everything she does to fit in, including buying expensive clothes, using the lost and found to try and look more fashionable. Like, she's at each step, especially relating to the clothes that she wears, she is punished for her choices, whereas Massey doesn't really face any consequences like that for all the unreasonable demands that she makes. In fact, everyone around her humors her. I mean, that's definitely linked to privilege, like we were talking about before, but I think it would have been interesting and a more well-rounded story if Massey had also had some kind of arc, same as Claire.
That is so interesting because I agree, but in the opposite way. I also think this movie and the narrative treat Claire and Massey differently in completely unfair ways, but in the opposite way. My take is that they treat Claire as if she's like the
hero.
Obvious hero, yeah, and like the stock, nice, shy protagonist when she isn't. And it's more interesting that she isn't. I like who Claire is as a character in this movie, but the movie won't treat her as such, which gets frustrating for me.
Yeah, I can totally see that.
In cases where they're doing the same things, they let Claire learn or like have a
redemption.
Yeah, whatever. It's just the given that she's a good guy. But Massey is never given the same grace.
I don't think it's the opposite of what I'm saying, really. I think it's an extension of what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly.
We're talking about two different things. So I agree with you that the characters around her let her get away with it. The story doesn't let her get away with it. But whereas with Claire, it's the opposite. The characters don't let her get away with what she's doing, but the story frames her as the hero, as the underdog, and she gets her redemption arc, she gets her lesson learned, but Massey isn't afforded that same treatment by the story. She doesn't get to develop enough, which is unfair. I agree with you.
What does happen now, though, is Massey goes horseback riding, as you do, on a private trail that everyone has, and meets Chris Abley on horseback. Cinderella 2015 could never. Cinderella 2015 wishes it had what the Clique had.
I mean, yes, both in terms of horse-related first meetings and also in terms of substance, I'm sure.
Yeah, truly. Can you believe the Clique is more ahead of its time than Cinderella 2015? Can you believe Cinderella 2015 is more sexist than the Clique?
Given the times we're in, I can absolutely believe it.
I am so incensed / confused why it's embarrassing that Massey thinks she and Chris Abley have a thing, even though he actually has a girlfriend, when he is so clearly letting her flirt with him in this scene, if not outright flirting back. It's obtuse to insist that it didn't mean anything, or like that it was dumb of Massey to misunderstand. Looking back on it, once I knew what the deal is with Chris Abley, I was like, what were you doing, Chris Abley? Get the fuck out of there. Go throw dodgeballs at your girlfriend.
Or not.
Or not, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. It seems mutual. They're interested in each other, and so I don't blame Massey at all for misunderstanding, or understanding.
Yeah. He's just too much of a himbo. Nothing was happening.
Yeah, you're right.
Truly.
He's probably trying to think of how to get his horse to spin around in a circle. But there's this part at the end of the scene where Massey talks to her horse, which I thought was kind of cute.
Yeah, I liked that too.
This is a trait that she carries over from her book counterpart as well, where she'll talk to her dog Bean or to her horse and share things that she can't with other people because she's scared that they'll use it against her. So they portray this habit in the movie quite a few times, but they don't bring in that insecurity. They don't bring in that emotion, and I kind of wish that they had. I wish they had shown Massey relying on her pets, especially when all her friends abandon her.
Yeah, I completely agree. That would have been great. That sounds very meaningful. Not to go back to Claire.
Yeah, Claire.
But she goes shopping with her mom, and she wants the $60 jeans. She is reading, like, this handbook of OCDs, I guess. And it reads, at OCD, fashion is a fine art and true form of self-expression. First of all, what kind of school is this? Second of all, and more importantly, I do love how the school kind of does serve as this real-life social bubble of these teenage girls, exacerbated by the fact that it is an all-girls school. At OCD, all these imagined realities of these girls' world, the social hierarchy, the intricate etiquette and its rules, everything that may not mean much to an outsider is actually realized within its walls and structures, physical or otherwise. But yeah, I do really like that aspect of it. And as I understand, it's more emphasized in the book. But even like the name OCD is fucked up. But yeah, that element of like absurdity and satire and exaggeration is there in the name itself as well as its function within the story.
That's such a great point. Initially, I just thought it was the humorous touch that Claire was using the school manual as like a guide to life. She was upholding the things said in it as like the word of law. But now that you draw that parallel as that school basically being an extension of this very different world that she stepped foot in, it's actually really interesting because that handbook is kind of like her Bible. It's her guide into this world. And yeah, the words are basically law. It's her chance at getting as much social currency as early on as possible. I also really like the way you described the microcosm as like realizing all of these issues or these perspectives that young girls have, which are maybe often in the quote real world dismissed as not important enough or frivolous or stupid. But I guess the school is like their domain. And I think in some ways, not completely, the movie for sure I think does a good job of depicting the absurdity while not judging it. I don't think it does as well a job of critiquing it, but overall I think it is successful in highlighting the particularities of this world.
Yeah. Totally agree. But in the scene itself, Claire really wants these $60 jeans. And see, here, it doesn't seem like the mom has ever hid what they can and cannot afford from Claire. So I just find it even more outrageous that Claire pushes for the $60 jeans.
The spirit of OCD has possessed her, and now she has a desperate need to fit in. So Claire convinces her mom to let her explore the next door, much fancier store. And there she runs into Dylan, who we will later learn is one of Massey's friends. Dylan's mom is being a piece of shit.
Yeah.
And Claire basically helps her trick her mom so that she can buy clothes that actually fit her. It's so sad the way that Dylan reacts to this scene, because when Claire expresses her sympathies about moms just not understanding, Dylan says, weren't they kids once too? And I don't think that applies to this scenario. Yeah. I would be asking, wasn't my mom ever human? The casual way in which this entire issue is treated in the movie and also in the books is just not good.
Totally. So the mom won't buy her jeans until she's thinner is basically what's happening here. This brings up a problem I have with the movie. I think this is either an element that's kind of lacking in the movie and the narrative, or one that's misplaced. It seems like part of what's fueling Dylan's character isn't just what's present within the social bubble of these teenage girls, but outside pressures as well, specifically from her mother. So I guess this is a similar thing to my thing about Massey's mom, where it feels like there's a missing piece here without seeing the influence of the adults in these kids' lives, but especially that of their mothers, who I can only assume went through similar things growing up. While I do find it interesting and valuable that the events of the movie are so isolated and particular to just the pretty committee. But in that case, I wish they had stuck with it and really treat everything as a symptom of its insular community. This thread about Dylan's mom kind of breaks that illusion for me, and they don't even follow it up with any other outside influences fueling their fucked up teenage girl dynamics. I know the moms also kind of drive the story forward, but the values and the fucked up dynamics of the pretty committee is entirely fueled by their world and by each other, right? Not by the moms, except for Dylan. So to me, this thread about the mom is either like a hint of something that's entirely missing from the movie and should be there, or is completely misplaced and shouldn't be there at all. Like, I think the fat shaming should just come from
Massey.
yeah, or like their community itself. The example that came to mind was in Pretty Little Liars, where the fucked up desires and issues of each of the main girls' parents is very much a factor in the decisions the girls themselves make and why they are the way that they are.
I didn't even think about that. That is definitely a weakness in the storytelling, and I think I understand why it's there, because this scene wasn't in the book. And I think they put it in the movie because I think they wanted to show that Claire could get along with Massey's friends just fine if it weren't for her meddling and for her being mean. And it emphasizes Massey's fear of losing her friends and being replaced by Claire. And it shows us a version of reality where this could happen before, Massey steps in. And so I think this whole scene was geared towards Claire and establishing her place within the group and establishing the dynamics between her and the other girls. And so because of that, I don't think they completely thought through the consequences that it has for Dylan's story and her character.
Basically, I'm like anyone but her mother. I just need another teen girl to be the bad guy.
Right.
But it's finally time to actually go to OCD. After all this fuss. 2 of my favorite lines are in the scene. The first of which is, God, Claire. And my second one, which is actually my number 1 favorite line, is, and I don't eat feet. I don't know why. Just the way she says it is so perfect. The way it's timed with the music, the way it like fits so well into the conversation. One of them is saying she doesn't eat sugar, and the other one is saying she doesn't eat feet, but they're talking about gummy feet. It's so good. I just think it's so funny.
I'm really glad you mentioned the timing, because I was also going to bring up the pacing in this scene. I just love how snappy the dialogue is. I love the contrast between Massey basically insulting Claire for not having enough money, while Claire is oblivious, digging around in her bag of gummy feet. I mean, it's funny, but it also tells us a lot about the characters and how aware they are of their own and each other's wealth. And while Claire does seem to be waking up to these particular differences, I feel like she still isn't maybe quite attuned to the nuances just yet.
That's actually a great point, because I do think someone in Massey's class cares more about whether or not you have wealth, and someone like Claire doesn't. Or at least not yet,
But here we also meet the other 2 friends in Massey's circle, Alicia and Kristen. Massey rates each of their outfits as they come out of their houses, and we have our Bratz Jade moment where Kristen comes out in a tracksuit with very obviously another outfit underneath it, and then she changes before getting in the car. So each of the girls, apart from Dylan, who's already met her, they meet Claire, and Kristen asks Massey, do we like her? And Massey says no. So now they don't like her. I'm a little bit torn. I'm wondering if they did it to lean into the absurdity of the whole thing, but it doesn't come across that way. Nothing in the scene to me reads that way. And so I don't think this line was necessary. I think we can already see that the girls will go along with everything Massey does and everything she says. And so this felt like an unnecessary addition.
I like the line because of the fact that it's the first thing that Kristen asks about Claire right after, who's this away? Because it's very telling. It's of the utmost importance that she knows what's in and what's out and sticks by it. Because, I would think the first question is, who is that? Why is she in your car? This is actually very telling of what she holds as the most important. Like, before everything else, she wants to know, how am I supposed to act about this?
That's fair.
But they do get to school after this long fashion show. They all get out and Claire is forgotten.
Yeah.
And we have this amazing hallway scene where we see the girls in context of the OCD social scene.
Yeah, strutting down the hallway. Massey greets her subjects.
They look amazing, by the way. Their outfits.
Right.
So good.
We get these brief glimpses of Massey interacting with other girls in her school, including the girl whose party she was supposed to go to. And something that you mentioned about Claire not responding appropriately to Massey's jabs kind of comes back to me here, because here we can see, I guess, how people are supposed to react. Massey throws out these one-liners and it's like immediate defeat. They all go along with what she's saying and what she thinks. The complete epitome of that is at the end of this scene where Massey realizes that she's lost one of her earrings, and she makes the entire hallway stop moving. And they all do it. I think these comedic touches make for such a fun watch when you're young. But then if you're watching it as an older viewer, you also clock again the absurdity of it, and you can see that the movie is not judging but also highlighting the absurdity of Massey's whims and her selfish demands.
But outside, while Massey is searching for her one diamond earring, Claire meets Chris Abley, and again, no thoughts in that head.
Yeah.
The first thing he says to anyone that he meets is, "Hi, I'm Chris
Abley."
Abley." Yeah. Introduces himself to every fucking one. Chris Abley, learn stranger danger. He's like a puppy or an NPC.
Definitely get NPC vibes from him. If Massey stuck around long enough, he would just start repeating what he already said.
Yeah, Massey sees some meat and is all incensed about it. And once Claire does get inside, Massey says a bunch of mean things to her. I understand that this is part of it because we've talked about it, right? Claire doesn't possess the etiquette. She doesn't know the rules.
Yeah, you have to have wordplay in your insults. You can't just call someone a bitch, Claire.
But she's not stupid. Well, Massey is saying all of these mean things to her, and her answer is, "I don't get it. What's going on?" Which to me is such a weird question. What do you mean? What's going on? I just don't get Claire. Wouldn't she just be like, "Oh, okay, these girls are being mean. I'll just mind my own business and do my own thing"? What is the answer she's looking for, I guess is my question, when she's asking shit like, "I don't get it. Why are you being like this?" Shut up, Claire. I think it's especially confusing to me because we know that Claire isn't stupid or misunderstanding them. She makes a pretty good comeback here and calls Massey a bitch. I think that was actually very smart and very funny. But she's also somehow acting like she doesn't know what's going on. Pick a lane. I don't know if it's just a flaw in the writing or whatever, but it just bugged me.
I think it is. I absolutely agree with you. Some of Claire's dialogues, or also her blocking in some of the scenes, confuses me so much. Also big NPC energy. She just stands there.
Yeah.
Claire genuinely seems like she has never interacted with a person before. Has no one ever said anything rude to you? It's such a weird response for her to be so confused about what's happening. Even if you don't quite understand what Massey's saying about, did I invite you to my barbecue?
Right.
If you're struggling to follow, you still understand her hostility, right? You still understand she's not being nice. So I also am so confused about why she just basically repeats the same thing. Huh? What? Why are you being like this? Because she's mean, Claire, that's why. This is not the only scene where it happens. It happens in art class, it happens in the cafeteria where Claire's just wandering around. Or she's just standing there. And I'm just Claire. It's so frustrating because otherwise Claire feels like a very well fleshed out character. But there are these certain moments where she just... See, I'm telling you, it's the ghost of... It's the ghost of OCD possessing her in those moments. The ghost doesn't understand what a barbecue is.
Yeah, they didn't have that back in the day.
Back in the Octavian country day.
But speaking of art class, even the teacher is mean. Or not mean, sassy. Or both, maybe.
That's a requirement to step foot into OCD, probably.
Yeah.
They're do you have good comebacks? Because otherwise these girls will destroy you.
Truly. There's this whole thing about, Alicia splattering paint on Claire's jeans and making people think that she got her period. And the teacher's being really weird about it. You were in an all-girls school. I bet that's not even the 50th time this has supposedly happened.
Even when I was a kid, this bugged me so much. Even when I was embarrassed about periods, I was teachers shouldn't react like that.
Yeah.
But I do think that the hush-hush and embarrassment around periods is so entrenched in the experience of being a young girl. And both the movie and the book bring up these things, but I don't think that they necessarily say anything about it. Like, I feel like it's supposed to be more a comedic element, but I think it would have been more interesting and it would have fit the general tone of the movie at least better if we had some kind of element of absurdity in maybe like the voice of the nurse who could potentially, point out how odd it is that a teacher at a girls' school is panicking about a period. It could be something that's equivalent to, for example, Isaac, Massey's driver, shaking his head when he sees how the girls are constantly belittling Claire. Like, that is the movie, saying something. Whereas here, it's just kind of played off as a funny thing, and it just doesn't add as much as some of the other elements in the movie.
Agreed.
Looking at stuff like this is what frustrates me when I then go on to read that Lacey Harrison apparently intended her series to be a satire. She mentioned that in one of the later books or something, that it was a parody all along, but it doesn't read like a parody. I think maybe the movie actually does a better job of capturing that absurdity in its tone and the visuals and everything compared to the books, which feel more straight cut, and especially when it comes to elements like this.
So the thing where Lacey Harrison claims that it was satire was in the foreword of the last book, if I'm remembering right.
In the book that I had, one of the books that I had, there's like a Q&A, and she mentions in it that she was actually inspired by her time at MTV. She used to work at MTV, and she was inspired by her coworkers being catty.
I totally see that.
And so she transplanted it into a middle school experience. I think she also mentioned in that Q&A that it was supposed to be like pointing out how stupid it is, and that was her intention all along.
I guess like whether or not it's satire is maybe a different thing to my point, but like I said, I didn't read the books, and this is coming from just my experience reading books like this and from Ashley Norton's video on the Clique books. But as I understand it, the books were, depicting these girls' lives, and from there, then you can understand the inner workings and humanize them. Not in the sense of like making you sympathize, but like that they are humans with insecurities and flaws and whatever. I do think presenting something like that as is in quite a heightened way, I would imagine, in the books, even if it's not to the same absurdity as the movie. To me, that feels more effective to what it is attempting. And not, again, I don't know if this counts as quote-unquote satire, but if what Lacey Harrison is saying is like she is attempting to depict something like that and say something about this behavior through it, in my opinion, that feels like a more interesting and effective way of doing it, rather than in a piece of media, whether it be a book or a movie, or I guess in this case the movie, where you have the movie itself say the message, because it kind of feels like cutting the message off at its knees. To me, like, I'd rather they just present us this ridiculous world, and from it we can learn whatever it is, right? Rather than at the end the movie is suddenly not that absurdist comedy anymore, just so you can say the message in the movie. But anyway, Claire gets the runaround. She's told the nurses somewhere else just so she can get more humiliated, and then finally gets to the actual nurse, and then she gets to pick out some clothes from the lost and found.
This is related to what I was saying before about how Claire is specifically punished in terms of her fashion choices. I like how it's specifically Claire's choice of something that she deemed appropriate for this school that comes back to be her downfall, because it's her really expensive white trousers that end up being ruined, and she ends up getting embarrassed because of them. And similarly, she also gets to pick out these new clothes and I guess this new persona in another attempt to fit in, which then backfires on her when she has to walk back home. She has to walk back in these shoes that aren't hers, that don't fit her. And so constantly the narrative is punishing her, I guess, for trying to fit in this particular way. And I do think that that leads to some kind of character development by the end of the movie. And this is the kind of thing that I think is missing for Massey.
Yeah.
During lunchtime, Massey tells her friends about meeting Chris, and I really like how she repeats Chris's MIA, but potentially doesn't understand. Maybe it's her being clever with the wordplay, but I'm assuming she doesn't know what it actually means and misconstrues it as missing in Armani.
Hilarious.
I think it shows us a little glimpse into her inner world
Her
and how
mind.
she is also faking it, really. She also doesn't know what the hell is going on. But after school, they all go spying on Chris at his school, and there's this whole scene where they're hiding out and waiting for him to come out of the school building. And I think there's this build-up in the scene that doesn't really amount to anything. When we were watching the movie, you're really nervous about Chris approaching, and he's coming increasingly closer and he's gonna see them, but nothing happens. That kind of deflates the tension and it's kind of anticlimactic. But actually what I also wanted to say is that when Chris comes out of the building, there's this slow motion shot of him, and it kind of reminded me of the slow-mo scene in
Aquamarine.
I'm sorry to disappoint you.
New Moon.
Yes! It reminded me of that scene in New Moon. But here it doesn't seem mean-spirited. You mentioned in that episode about how this is supposed to be where the girls scream. It seemed like a judgy edition, but here it feels different.
It's an in-joke.
Yeah, the whole movie is so entrenched in the experiences of young girls, and I like the way that the movie uses exaggeration to gently point out some of the absurdity, like how the small things seem like the end of the world at that young age, but it's also not judging.
It's just like Aquamarine. It was also not mean in Aquamarine when they did the slow-mo.
Yeah, I'll take your word for it because I don't remember, but yes. They also have the angelic music over the shot of Chris Abley. It's really funny, actually. In his head, he's like, "Hi, I'm Chris Abley."
Yeah, he's got two dialogue options. "Hi, I'm Chris Abley," or "It's a date." Yeah, but Claire does eventually get home.
Yeah, somehow.
And she's dressed differently, so she tells her mom that it's Massey's clothes and that she spilled paint on her pants in art class, and I don't understand why Claire lies. Like, I get not wanting the mom to interfere and wanting to handle things yourself, but those reasons are more obvious to me later on when Claire is all upset and is trying to hide it from her mom, because that feels more like there's actually something to hide and to handle on your own. Here, I'm not sure what's driving her to lie. She already said she spilled paint on her jeans, so she doesn't have to lie about the clothes. I guess that's what she says later on, how she wants to be seen as liked by Massey, which is an interesting point that the movie makes. I guess I just wish they had depicted this desire and motivation in Claire better at this point in the story, since it just confused me in the scene when we were always shown how close and open with her mom she had been before.
Yeah, I can totally see that. But I also really like it as a parallel to Massey's tendencies to try and control the narrative around her. Like, at the beginning of the movie, when she's not allowed to go to the party, she has to take that narrative in hand and twist it so that she is once again in control. And I feel like this is Claire doing that in her own context, where she wants to be seen as liked. In the eyes of her mom, I guess she wants to be seen as someone who's not struggling at all. Like, I'm doing perfectly fine. Massey loves me. So it's just her version of doing that thing in my eyes.
That's a great point. I love that parallel.
It's not just about lying about the negative, but also inventing the positive.
I think I would have liked it better if then she didn't say anything about the pants. Like, the pants doesn't come up at all. But she already hid it by saying that I spilled paint on it.
Yeah. Right after this, we get a scene of Massey writing her State of the Union. What I really liked in this scene is Massey is ranting while she talks, and we get these little glimpses of her dog Bean's reactions to what she's saying, as if she's a reflection of Massey's inner world. We're so entrenched in these girls' perspectives, and it's fun that the things that are important to them are also given importance by the movie. We see these glimpses of Bean's perspective, and since Massey treats her like a confidant, we are also seeing her as a confidant, and I really love that.
I like it too. I also really like how the scene shows how insecure Massey is as much as everyone else.
Yes.
But Claire still, Claire still carpools with them to school, and this time they're talking about Kristen's project where she has to like start a company or whatever, and they decide to do a makeup company, and they're being mean to Claire. And Claire suggests the name Glambition for their makeup company, and they take it.
It's a change from the book. Whereas Claire comes up with the business name here, in the book, she comes up with a very stupid name. And Massey's the one who comes up with Glambition.
Huh.
Again, I think the movie's trying to highlight that Claire could fit in with the girls if certain other factors were in place. And by that I mean money. But I like that in the book, Claire was even further removed from them. She was in her own entire world.
I agree. This movie is too Team Claire, when the point is there is no team anybody. I hate every time the movie makes this mistake, which brings me to Isaac. The driver ends up telling Claire that there are more girls than those girls in the school. Go find them. Which, agreed. Claire, why are you even doing this? But no, I get it. I get that the point is like, whether or not you admit it, you jump at the chance to be part of the pretty committee. I guess I do like that the driver presents this option for Claire, and it does highlight the fact that Claire does not choose it, that she does have this desire to be part of the pretty committee or something like it.
I agree.
I like Isaac as a person, as a character. And I like that he reacts the way outsiders would to Massey's shenanigans. And this would have been, and is maybe, a great way for the movie to communicate a divide between Massey and her world and the quote-unquote real world. But the fact that the movie keeps aligning Isaac with Claire kind of ruins it for me. I guess there is that moment where like Claire starts to get with the times and Isaac is a little bewildered by Claire's behavior. But I don't know, it's like, again, it's the movie like telling us, the audience, that we should be siding with Claire because Isaac is the voice of reason. Whereas that's like not the point.
I agree with your point, but not necessarily with your example. The scene where he specifically tells her to branch out. In that scene, I think we don't align with Claire. We're, at least as, as more mature viewers, we align with Isaac. We're like, yeah, Claire, what are you doing? Stop putting yourself through this for no reason. But I do agree with your point otherwise.
But Claire does kind of take Isaac's advice. During lunch, she sits with somebody new, or with somebody.
She sits for the first time.
Yeah, she sits for one. But she sits next to Lane. I really like Lane's depiction here and for the rest of the movie because it's not like she's just uncool. It's that she is breaking all of these social rules. Like she's playing music loudly in a public place, which is like never okay, but especially here. And like some of it is a matter of her just having different interests from like the pretty committee or like the OCD masses. But I like how they also pepper in stuff about her being genuinely weird. Like it's not that arbitrary that she's seen the way that she is.
Yeah, she's a foil to Claire, a direct parallel, in that she is owning her outcast status.
Yeah. But even in this scene, like Claire is outwardly embarrassed by Lane.
It was interesting to me that Claire was embarrassed in this scene because previously she's been pretty confident in herself. And this is the first time where she seems to want to shrink her presence under the judgment and the gaze of her peers. Claire is increasingly becoming aware of certain differences between her and her peers, and so I think now it's affecting her self-confidence, which is a very real issue.
You're right. In that sense, it's actually quite a good depiction of like growing up, slowly growing more self-aware and things.
Internalizing all those biases. Lovely.
Yeah. Oh, she does lie to Lane at this point and pretend that she and Massey are friends, which I think is an interesting part of her character. And you know what? It reminds me of Mitchie in Camp Rock. the way she would lie just to, like, build up this perception of herself.
Michi is a perfect comparison. I saw it as an extension of what I mentioned earlier with her lying to her mom, just like constantly trying to build this narrative around herself.
Talking about the mom, though, Massey's mom
Yeah.
invites Claire to Massey's sleepover, which is like, oh god. First of all, I can't believe Claire says yes. Like, wouldn't she already know better? This is my problem with her. Not to victim blame, but why are you putting yourself in these situations? The second thing, the mom inviting Claire is just like, we know she knows how Massey is. And Massey's never hidden her attitude or whatever. Why wouldn't she spare Claire the grief if she's trying to be nice to Claire? Why would you do this to Claire?
Maybe her mom also hates Claire.
There we go. That's my answer.
It's that thing where we are in the girl's perspective and we are in a world where their issues and their grievances and their fears are given the importance that they deserve, but these adults exist outside of that world, in their own world, with their own, tax-related problems and stuff. So
Did you say tax-related?
they're rich, so I assume they have tax-related.
I don't know. The rich doesn't really get taxed anymore.
They're busy evading it.
You're right.
But yeah, they're in their own world with their own problems, and I think it's just them not taking the problems Claire has with Massey and vice versa seriously.
But Massey's being mean again. Sorry, that's so many of my notes. But the mom does tell Massey off for not being nice to Claire during the sleepover, and this is the scene with the giant kitchen island, I think.
Yeah.
It feels like both disrespectful and like belittling their friendship. Especially because we see them as friends. It feels even more of an invasion of privacy to just invite some rando.
Yeah, I absolutely... Some rando. I absolutely agree. But when I was watching this movie as a kid, I was very much on Claire's side. I was like, give the poor girl a chance. And so you can see that the movie does put an active effort in framing her that way. But yeah, it is evident that while Massey and her friends are obviously not always in the right, they're also not always in the wrong. It does feel like disrespecting a boundary that shouldn't be disrespected just because it's a kid.
And oftentimes it is like moments like this where Claire isn't even the bad guy. Like the mom is doing this. But Massey, in a show of malevolence, I guess, does invite Claire to stay with them in the cabana where they sleep.
Right before that happens, there's this moment where Massey comes into the living room and sees Claire all by herself. And in the book, we actually get more of an insight into what Massey's thinking at this point. And I really liked this scene in retrospect. Because Massey, she's reminded of seeing a Christmas tree lit up and decorated all by itself with no one to appreciate it. And I really like
gay vibes.
how... I really like how her own fear of loneliness is what she sees in Claire. I like that they included the moment in the movie, but I don't think it quite hits that same emotional note. But I like that it's there. But yeah, they're all playing this game of would you rather when Claire comes in. And the question they're talking about is, would you rather have friends who all secretly hate you, or would you rather be a friendless loser? And I hate this scene. Same as Ashley Norden. To give some context from the book, when they ask Claire, she is honest, and she says that she would rather have friends who secretly hate her. That's better to her than being alone. And Massey is also secretly thinking this, but she's not able to say it out loud, and so she goes along with her friends and says, yeah, I also, of course, would want to be a friendless loser. But the real insecurity is being alone, being all by yourself. Whereas in the movie, it's the other way around, and Claire is very... she's the hero, she's the good guy, so of course she's like, yeah, I would rather be a friendless loser. And ultimately, they also have Massey hold the same sentiment, and that's supposed to be a bonding moment for them where she brings it up. And it doesn't work because this whole movie is predicated on this insecurity of being alone.
Exactly.
Especially in a context where popularity is so important. And the number of friends you have, the number of people who are, following your every move, that's so important in that context, this switch around doesn't make sense. And I have the feeling it's to paint Claire as the good guy again, and I really hate it.
I hate it too. I hate it so much. It's just like, you're missing the point in an effort to have Claire say something good. Where, like, the whole point is that they're all flawed. In truth, the more vulnerable answer is friends who secretly hate you.
Yeah. They play truth or dare, and there's more drama, and after being insulted yet again, Claire leaves. Massey actually goes after her. And this is also a scene that I like much better in the book. When Massey asks her to stay, Claire just comes up with an excuse, and Massey's like, okay, all right, fine, whatever. There's more of a mutual understanding, and it's the first time that Massey's shown any kind of awareness of how hurt Claire is. And it's a much more emotionally charged moment than the one that we have in the movie, where Claire basically snaps at Massey and then leaves.
I really don't like Claire's line here. It's very cheesy.
It's like surface level cattiness. It's a missed opportunity to do something interesting.
And I know that Claire's been pretty outspoken and stuff, but the fact that she is so self-assured in this moment specifically, where she can bring herself to say something this pointed to Massey, I think kind of undercuts the scene and the point. It makes the fact that she is hurt less impactful, I guess. If she is strong enough to say something like this, to confront Massey, then this wouldn't even be an issue in the first place.
That's a great point. The fact that she still wants Massey's approval despite being hurt is the thing that should prevent her from being this snappy in the first place.
Yeah. But so Chris Abley and Lane comes over. The girls spy on them from like the window, and Claire pulls out the big guns and like starts stroking Chris Abley's hair to make Massey jealous. It's so funny. She also discovers that Chris Abley actually has a girlfriend.
Yeah, which may or may not come back later. Now that she's learned that Lane is his sister, Massey's suddenly very interested in forming a friendship. And so she basically tells her that Claire ditched her for Massey's sleepover.
I don't know how Massey knows that Claire had plans with Lane.
That's a good point.
Maybe she doesn't tell Lane that explicitly. Maybe she just mentions Claire at the sleepover, and Lane is like,
why even mention it if you're not trying to sow discord between the two of them?
I don't know. We both just have questions for each other.
In conclusion, this scene doesn't make sense, but Massey creates a rift between Claire and Lane.
Yeah. Massey also goes to get mani-pedis with Lane in an effort to find things out about Chris Abley. Again, this is like another depiction of how Lane lacks the etiquette that Massey possesses. I know that she comes from the like rich family or whatever, but she doesn't participate in these societal rituals, I guess. She's loud and embarrassing and giggling through her pedicure, and Massey is embarrassed by all of it.
Yes, you already mentioned that Lane is also from an affluent family, so her dynamic with Massey is quite different from Claire's. Again, I feel like this is similar to what I was talking about with Massey breaking certain etiquette rules. I feel like Lane may be familiar with the rules, but she just doesn't care, and she is in that position to break them. Like, maybe not in Massey's world, because that makes her uncool, that makes her an outcast, but I think Lane maybe buys less into the whole spiel, and so she's more aware of her standing in the general outside world and knows she's perfectly fine in the outside world, and that gives her the freedom to break these etiquette rules. Maybe this is not the best example of that, because I think it's a pretty unspoken but universal rule that you shouldn't be loud in public spaces. So this is a bad example, but I think my point kind of stands otherwise.
Yeah, she's less entrenched and isolated in the OCD world or Massey's world. She doesn't value the same things.
Yeah, but that being said, it is all the more interesting that even though she doesn't buy into it, she does still buy into it. Like, she is still stoked to be friends with Massey.
I really love that element to her character.
It makes her more interesting, and it's not this character who's meant to scoff at the things that little girls like. It's showing us that even girls who might reject these things on the surface might still want them, and it's okay to want them.
It's an honest depiction. What I find really interesting is the fact that Massey hides that she's hanging out with Lane. It highlights her insecurities and belief, true or otherwise, that her place in the social pecking order is far from secure. Because she could have easily told the girls she's hanging out with Lane to get intel on Chris Abley, but the mere association to someone like Lane is enough of a threat to Massey. And I think it's true. Like, even though it does come from her insecurities, and I know, like, we've talked about how she is in a position to break these rules, I do think that her position isn't secure. Like, I feel like that's kind of part of the point of the movie, that all of these things are real. The social hierarchy is real, the fact that it's precarious is real, all of these rules are real. So while it does highlight Massey's insecurities, it's also just true.
Yeah, the movie does a good job of emphasizing that little girls are also people.
They have vibrant inner lives with complexities.
Yeah, exactly.
Claire is swimming in the indoor pool while the girls are also there, and she makes up this designer, Astrid, who supposedly made her swimsuit. But it's a lie, obviously. And the girls buy it, but when Massey comes in, she doesn't and knocks Claire down a peg. And it does show how Claire is learning, but still, isn't on Massey's level necessarily. But this all leads to Claire, like, crying home in front of her mother. And she tries to say that it's nothing, but her mom guesses it's Massey. And the mom threatens to find out herself and talk to Massey's mom. And, okay, I know we've talked about how, like, the moms just don't take these things seriously and they're on the outside and blah blah blah, but I don't get what the mom thinks would happen here. Like, she already saw that Massey was rude to Claire even in front of her parents. The parents didn't do anything about it, or at least not enough to change things. It's hard for me to imagine that the mom doesn't understand the politics at play in quote-unquote tattling. She herself is within a society. She understands the power dynamics between her and Massey's mom. So even within that, I don't quite understand what she expects to happen.
I didn't even think of that. What we saw earlier was just Massey being snide, but maybe her mom suspects that Massey's done something worse to Claire at this point. That's the only answer I can come up with, but what you say does make a lot of sense.
But because her mom encourages Claire to talk to Massey, actually no, she threatens to do worse if Claire doesn't go over to talk to Massey. Claire ends up sneaking into Massey's room. I guess this is where the subterfuge happens, but she takes over Massey's IM and talks to the rest of the girls as Massey and, like, talks herself up and makes up a trend that matches the clothes that she has. And then when that succeeds, she starts shit-talking the girls to their faces through IM, pretending to be Massey so that they'll get mad at Massey. And she goes so far as to pry a secret out of Kristen by telling her that she's been hanging with Lane, and in return finds out that Kristen is on a scholarship and that her parents aren't as wealthy as she claimed. I love the sequence.
I do as well. I like this escalation of Claire's manipulative tendencies. Like, it feels like an appropriately big enough mistake for her to make after all her efforts so far. And I like that by the end of it, it doesn't even seem like Claire even likes the girls, let alone wanting to be friends with them. At one point, her brother Todd follows her, and he calls Massey's friends annoying. And she's like, don't worry, if this works out, she'll be without her annoying friends soon enough. And it seems less like I want to be part of this group and more like I want to take revenge on Massey and, separate this group that I couldn't join. It raises an interesting question about what fitting in means and how being in this world can warp your perception.
I guess acting like this is kind of fitting in.
True. In doing her worst, she has done the best.
Yeah. But it works. The girls are all mad at Massey. And the fact that the girls are so mad at Massey for what she supposedly said to them, I think is further proof that it's out of character for her to be so malicious and to target her friends just to make them feel bad about themselves, as opposed to saying selfish and uncharitable things because she's so self-absorbed and insecure. These are two different things, even though they can both be mean.
Yeah, I can't imagine, say, the Plastics from Mean Girls reacting in the same way if they found out Regina was bad-mouthing them. I think they would be totally unsurprised.
Yeah. Whereas here, Massey sometimes does say things, but it's because of, like, her beliefs. Like, maybe she would say, like, those shoes are kind of not cute. But it's because she believes that, not because she wants to knock Kristen down a peg.
And I mean, like you already said, that can still be mean, but it's coming from a different place than just trying to hurt somebody. And it actually is surprising to me, not the fact that Massey's friends abandoned her, but that they abandoned her and replace her with Claire.
Because it's Claire. Who wants Claire?
Maybe it's supposed to be a slap in Massey's face, but I didn't quite get that. It seemed, I don't know, more like Claire's the main character, so she has to be a part of the group now. But I wish it had been a little bit more that the girls are doing it to hurt Massey in turn.
Yeah, agreed. But yeah, Massey even drives home alone in her car, and the girls shop with Claire. Alicia buys Claire all her clothes and then gives her a phone.
Yeah. She also gets a makeover, and she gets back home super late, and her mom's all worried, and they have this argument about Claire's new attitude.
And Claire has this outburst, and the mom tells her she's not allowed to hang out with those girls anymore. I think my problem with the mom and or moms in this movie is that as a character, they aren't really fleshed out. They just seem to be caricatures meant to spout stereotypical lines for our protagonists to react to. And they don't make sense within their context. Like, the fact that Massey's mom is so reasonable, like, I don't need her to be a bitch, but, like, she seems so removed from her context. And Claire's mom, it seems so removed from her context in the sense that she isn't reacting to Claire. Like, she's just spouting the line she's supposed to be spouting as this mom. She seems to be like a brick wall. She sees Claire acting the way that she does, and instead of, like, taking that in and then reacting appropriately, she's reacting the way you would expect a stereotypical mom to react.
I agree with you. As a kid viewer, you're not as attuned to the adults' personal lives and their personalities, but they could have made these side characters more interesting.
Just don't have her be like that.
Yeah.
Like, it's easy to take out.
The parents, the way they interact with the main characters and with each other doesn't always reflect the nuances that we know these characters should have. They're all perfectly civil in the dinner scene, but there's no underlying tension or anything about the fact that this family is now moving in to live with us. I assume rent-free. I think these characters solely exist to move the conflicts forward for the main characters, unfortunately.
I actually love this next scene where Massey is at her computer and she eventually gets Kristen to come over and they finally figure out the whole I am subterfuge. I adore the fight they have here. The way they find out is so realistic. Neither of them say anything that's out of the realm of the pieces of truth that they each hold. Like, they have a pretty prolonged argument that leads to this reveal. I just really like it, especially how Massey first puts on this pathetic front and then immediately switches up and is all indignant and mad because she is.
Yeah, you're right. Neither of them really says anything other than what they insist is the truth. By discovering the inconsistencies, they realize something is up. And Massey is very quick on the uptake and realizes that Claire has been messaging people as her. And they have this 5-way call where they surprise Claire and send her this, I assume it's supposed to be threatening, but it was just kind of funny, message about how she is not just done, but well done.
Hilarious.
After this, to be honest, I was expecting something big to happen. I thought they were going to humiliate her somehow in front of the entire school. But the next scene we get is Massey and her friends working on their makeup project, and Claire just happens to come in to ask to borrow an egg, and she just gets an egg thrown at her, which, I mean, I understand is devastating in its own way, but it's not the well done level of revenge that I was expecting.
Yeah, that egg's raw.
You're like, how did they not cook the egg first? What kind of revenge is this? Revenge is a dish best served boiled.
Well done! Oh.
Oh, you thought the egg should be well done.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, that's not well done. That's raw. I guess I gotta give it to the girls. They're just so done with this whole thing with Claire.
They meant we are well done with you. Earlier in this scene, Massey gives everybody a present, and it's this robe emblazoned with their names and glambition. And I really like that it's basically a uniform to reaffirm the girl's loyalty to her.
But, Claire, covered in raw egg, cries to... Actually, no, she's not covered in raw egg anymore when she cries to her mom. She cleaned up and then started crying, I guess. I don't know. But the mom hasn't been so helpful so far. But I do like that she says here, you can't make someone like you. Which is the most I've liked this character. This is also when I figured out my real problem with this movie. My problem is not with Claire. I like that she's the other side of the coin to Massey. That's the more interesting take, and arguably the movie's point. Or maybe it was that of the source material. My problem is the way this movie would sometimes completely ignore that in lieu of doing a whole thing where we have to listen to Claire cry. Like, it's very, if you can't stand the heat, then get out of the kitchen, It's one thing if the movie is trying to do a whole takedown of girls like Massey and her behaviors and her world. That's fine. But this movie, or at least the book, doesn't really do that within the narrative. It's more about the inner workings of it and how girls like Claire, girls from a different class, are either unequipped to survive within this social bubble or adapt to play dirty and conform to succeed within it. And this muddling of messages just kind of brings the movie down for me. With them baking the message of Massey bad, or like girls like this bad, into the narrative, it falls into the trap of looking down on these girls and their problems. Whereas the whole point of this narrative is supposed to be that these are real problems, that these are real social structures, these are real things that the girls are going through. And Claire in the scene says, it's everything, the school, this house, my clothes. That's a great line to highlight this, actually, because it's not Massey as a singular entity. It's not divorced from this upper-class Westchester community. So framing Claire's behavior when she succumbs to the traps of the societal structure as a personal failing rather than a symptom of the bigger issue is sloppy at best and dishonest and misleading at worst.
Yeah, that's a really great way to put it. And I mean, a really great point. One of the worst mistakes is drawing this dichotomy between Claire and Massey and framing Claire as the good guy and Massey as the villain. Then ultimately, by that logic, we are demonizing certain behaviors and certain tendencies that all stem from the same source for both girls. They're just manifesting in different ways, affected by different factors, their socioeconomic backgrounds, etc. But ultimately, you're right, the real villain is the institution. I know we talked about Massey being villainized, but it also feels like Claire is being punished for her attempts to cross these barriers that you shouldn't. Because Claire is the only one punished for her actions, it seems like
she shouldn't even try.
Yeah, her lesson at the end of this seems to be, I shouldn't have tried, I should have stayed in my place. And I don't think that was the intended message of the movie. I think it's just an unfortunate implication that comes about from, once again, not only upholding this dichotomy, but then also, making the two characters go through such different arcs. And I mean, Massey's arc is basically non-existent. It's a straight line. But all of that being said, the one thing I like about the scene is that it gives Claire the space to be upset about everything that's happened. Like, unabashedly upset. I feel like in this moment, more than any other, Claire feels more human. And I wish we had a similar... Well, I mean, I suppose the last scene is supposed to be that for Massey, where she feels human, but I think they failed to pull that off.
I think this is also why I was especially upset at the scene when the mom was telling Claire off. Because Claire has this outburst about the clothes, right? Like, whatever, our clothes suck, you suck, I hate our family. I don't know, that's not what she said. But she says, like, mean things. And the mom's response is like, you know what, you're not hanging with those girls anymore. And I understand, like, this can be a flaw of the mom's. Like, this is me, like, pointing out this is one of the symptoms of this problem with the movie that I have. Of, like, not acknowledging that these problems are born from their surroundings, their environment. Like, okay, you take Claire into this environment with these awful people and you don't expect her to develop these behaviors. It's your job to prepare for this, like to prepare Claire for this. This is the opportunity to parent her. It's putting the blame on like the wrong things. And again, I understand that can be a flaw of the moms, but I don't think it's really depicted that way here. Whereas like the whole point of the movie and this narrative is that anyone in Claire's shoes would become this way. Which is why Massey became the way she is, which is why all of the girls are the way they are.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So the girls have this field trip where Massey and co are planning on selling the lip glosses that they've been making. But before we get into that, Claire makes amends with Lane, and I like her apology.
I do too.
She's very direct and acknowledges her mistakes, and I like her acknowledgement that even she lost sight of what she was trying to do and ended up hurting a bunch of people. Throughout this scene and the next one, I like that she individually makes up, or at least apologizes to everybody that she hurt.
I specifically love Claire's insight on her own desires to join the pretty committee. She says the more they excluded me, the more important it became to be part of the group. And her envy for what the pretty committee has is very real and valid. This is the point of the movie, right? Like that we all feel this way, and there's nothing wrong with feeling this way, especially when you are in these circumstances. Like, how can you not? And Lane expresses this as well, and I really love that.
Yeah, me too.
Lane's insight on what makes the pretty committee special is not my favorite thing. She says that the pretty committee believe they're special, so people treat them like they are, which like is just not true. It's because they exemplify and uphold the values held up by the white wealthy upper class.
Yeah.
Again, this is a divorcing of the pretty committee and the social structures and everything going on here from its roots.
I mean, coming from a 12-year-old, I wouldn't expect her to understand that, but they didn't need to have this line.
Yeah.
They didn't need to say anything. They could have just left it open-ended, and we as the viewer understand.
Yeah, and the important part here is the question. I have no idea what makes them special, but they just are. That's the ticket. You got it. And then Lane ruins it.
Yeah. But yeah, their heart-to-heart is interrupted by the girls announcing the launch of their makeup company. And they pass out these lip glosses that end up making a bunch of girls have an allergic reaction. And Claire gets this mysterious text telling her that Lane's oatmeal is supposed to be soothing. And Claire saves the day with oatmeal.
I love that the lip glosses are named after the girls.
I mean, you phrased it really well when you were talking about how they uphold certain values that are championed as ideal in this social class, and they are basically commodifying themselves and by extension those values, and it's perhaps a reflection of how, you know, the privileged profit off of their privilege, and it's like a self-feeding cycle.
Yeah, that's such a great point.
But yeah, the field trip is cut short. They have to go to the hospital instead.
I know for some allergies you need EpiPens, and I am imagining, because Vincent is the one who's leading this, Vincent with 30 EpiPens just going bam, 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 bam.
I'm surprised he didn't just write them a bunch of
notes for the nurse.
Remember, she's by the art wing. Just walk back. While they are stopped at the hospital, Kristen comes up to Claire and they have this very short but sincere exchange. And Kristen tells Claire that she's glad she told Claire her secret and not Massey. Once again, it's, I think, a reflection of those insecurities. Like, even though she is friends with Massey, there's this underlying worry about how Massey's gonna treat her if she finds out. And, of course, the pressure from her environment, too.
I mean, I think she's right. Massey wouldn't do it maliciously, but she probably wouldn't be aware enough to be careful about it. She'd be like, what's the big deal? You're poor, right? But we get to see Claire have these one-on-ones with the rest of the girls too at the auction. She returns her clothes to Alicia along with the phone. And I really like when Alicia kind of tips her hat at Claire for her shenanigans. And it goes to show how expected it is to social climb in their world and what people are willing to do for it. It's just another day at OCD.
Yeah, and because of the way the movie sets everything up, it isn't like the typical, oh, girls are gonna backstab, girls are gonna catfight, girls are gonna be mean to each other. It's not that. I mean, overall, there are some failings like we discussed, but overall, it's highlighting that it's this environment that the girls are in. It's just them trying to survive.
Claire also figures out what Massey's up to.
Yeah, Massey has this whole plan to jump out of a giant cake to surprise Chris Abley for his birthday. And she's wearing a shirt that says, I heart Chris Abley. Claire sees the giant cake being wheeled in. She realizes that Massey's inside and she saves her at the last minute. She invites Chris's girlfriend, Fawn, onto the stage. Do you think that's how he won her over? Just, hi, my name's Chris Abley.
He catches the dodgeball and, like, activate it. Like, he's activated and goes, hi, I'm Chris Abley. But yeah, Claire wheels Massey backstage. And Massey, like, thanks Claire and asks, why did you help? And Claire says, because I'm not you. And I hate this so much. Okay.
I hate that line.
This is Claire choosing to not play Massey's games. But also, it feels a little holier than thou, especially after
Absolutely.
she's just discovered that she can so easily be someone like Massey. Like, it's nice that she decides to be a nice person, but it also feels like she didn't learn the lesson of the movie then, doesn't it? You know?
Yeah, absolutely. That was very unnecessary moralizing. It felt like the movie was projecting its attitude onto Claire and making her say what the movie believes rather than what Claire, the character, would be saying. And instead of making herself seem better than Massey, I wish that maybe she could emphasize that independent of Massey's actions, she is actively choosing to do differently. Like, even though we are the same person and we can fall into the same pitfalls, I am choosing to be aware of that from now on. And that's where Claire is an interesting parallel and a foil to Massey. And maybe Massey then also has a revelation, which is very much missing from this ending scene.
I don't like how honest Claire and Massey are in this scene. Like, why is Massey suddenly spilling her guts and saying all of these things? Like, the fact that she's vulnerable means she wouldn't say all of these things. She's like, you're like a major threat. And we don't need her to say that. It feels like in this scene, it's because the movie wants us to believe that this is true, but it's not. It's not that Claire is a major threat, because she fucking isn't. Are you fucking kidding me, Claire? No. But also, like, the point is that Massey's insecure. That's why she thinks Claire is a major threat. So, like, while I buy Massey's insecurity and all, I don't buy her telling Claire about it. She is way too insecure to tell anybody about this. I mean, she would only ever tell her horse and Bean.
At this point, it seems like they're getting the same treatment that their parents did, in that they're saying things that you're supposed to say at the end of a movie like this. There are so many factors tied up, like we've been talking about the entire time, like so many socioeconomic factors that would prevent Massey from ever seeing Claire as a threat. The movie drops the ball here.
Yeah, and the worst part of the movie, Massey tells Claire that she would also rather be a friendless loser.
Ugh.
And it's just so shitty. I hate it so fucking much. We already harped on this. But it would be more telling and meaningful for her to say that she would rather be someone with fake friends. To show the vulnerable part of her being scared of losing friends. Like, it's bad enough that they picked what they did in the first place in the sleepover scene, because that means they were all willing to tell the truth and be vulnerable and show their insecurities, when they should have been putting up a front about how they're self-assured enough that imperfect or shallow friendships aren't of value to them. And that's not true to these girls, to any girl, to any 13-year-old girl put in this position of this crazy social bubble. Hell, to anybody in this crazy social bubble, the wealthy upper class bubble, as far as I understand. I've never been there, but from what I've heard, I did watch 3 seasons of Revenge, so I know my shit. But yeah, it's just, this to me is the most egregious part of the movie. I was like, okay, get the fuck out of here. I cannot believe I paid $0 for this movie.
I totally agree. If anything, bringing back I would pick whatever option as well as an alternative to, like, outwardly talking about everything. That could have been a hint of friendship.
You know what would have been kind of really cool, actually? If, like, in the sleepover scene, they did say what they did in the book. Claire says that she would rather have friends who hate her, and everyone else says friendless loser. And then in this scene, Massey like concedes and she's like, you know what? I was a friendless loser for a little bit, and it sucked. And like, she doesn't say outright, hey, remember that would you rather question? One of my biggest pet peeves in movies, and I mean like it's up there, is whenever they want to reference something that happened earlier in the show or in the movie or whatever, and they explicitly say, remember that time that this happened? Well, now I'm gonna say this thing that will mean something. Oh, Massey does give Claire a flower, and Claire like daydreams about it as she falls asleep. I guess they're into each other now.
Classy.
Yeah, classy. That's my takeaway from this movie. Enemies to lovers, am I right?
That's a great segue into our absurd conclusions, I guess.
Yeah. So, in absurd conclusion, Chris Abley is an NPC, and he can only say, hi, I'm Chris Abley, or it's a date. If you unlock a secret third dialogue option.
He hits you in the face with a dodgeball.
Yeah, he actually throws a dodgeball at you.
And in another absurd conclusion, Claire got possessed by the OCD ghost at the beginning of the movie, which explains her random, really weird behavior, where she just randomly walks around, stands there, or acts really confused.
Yeah, the ghost hasn't seen the new renovations until they took over Claire's body.
Yeah.
So, now that we've discussed this movie in excruciating detail, have your opinions changed? Would you recommend this movie?
I think my opinion hasn't changed, because I always thought this movie was a fun time, and it is. And should you feel inclined to look deeper, it is saying something. The ability to do so is not consistent. There are certain weak points, and the ending is disappointing and does a disservice to these really complex characters that they build up throughout the story, but I don't think that's a big enough flaw to, at the very least, not be able to enjoy the movie. So I would definitely recommend it. It's a really great watch, regardless of your age. Like, you might take away different things from it, but it's still fun. What about you?
My opinions have changed because, like I said, I kind of remembered this movie falsely as kind of shitty. I think maybe just like younger me just did not get the like absurdist humor and just thought like maybe I'm too old for this or something and like did not get it. But now that I actually am too old for this, I realized that I'm not too old for this at all. It's excellent. There are lots of missteps, as we've discussed, which is such a shame, but overall it's pretty good. I think like honestly the missteps totally are born from the fact that they don't trust their audience, is basically it. But, you know, go into it knowing that, and you'll have a grand old time. I totally recommend this movie to anybody. I will say, like, I think it will be less annoying to people who maybe this movie would resonate with more. I can totally see how people who totally don't understand this not being into it.
I can only speak from my perspective, but to me it seems like everybody who exists in society goes through constraints like this. Maybe not the same constraints, but similar constraints throughout their lives. No one is exempt from it. Even if you can't directly relate to the characters, you can still sympathize. You can still understand. If the reason that you don't enjoy this movie or don't get this movie is because their struggles are not specifically your struggles, I do think it's a you problem. If you can't see these characters as interesting because they are young girls and, you know, who cares about their silly little problems, it's a you problem. But I do understand if this is not everybody's cup of tea in terms of its tone or the absurdity that it adopts, that kind of thing, I totally understand.
This movie is basically American Psycho, is it not? If you can accept the absurdity and the point that American Psycho makes about the quote-unquote male psyche and how that applies to society as a whole, I think you can put yourself through trying to understand the psyche of a 13-year-old wealthy white girl in an all-girls private school.
It's not even pushing you that far out of your comfort zone.
All right. I guess what I'm saying is like, it's funny that it's flipped for American Psycho. The palatable part of it is like the male psyche part, and like the absurdity would be the bigger hurdle or whatever, but like you're expected to jump over that. Whereas here, the absurdity may be the easier thing to swallow, and the female psyche is what you're expected to jump over, which I think is really funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, Massey and Claire, two sides of the same coin. The Clique and American Psycho, two sides of the same coin. That's my hot take.
The Clique is the American Psycho of this podcast for us.
Yes. There we go.
And Princess and the Pauper can retain its position as Citizen Kane. I will say, movies like Legally Blonde and Mean Girls are upheld as these masterpieces, as they should be. And they also, I mean, they face their share of criticisms and people misunderstanding them. But there are people willing to overcome that hurdle and immerse themselves in the female psyche. So it's not like it hasn't been done. And I don't necessarily understand why the Clique should be an exception. Like, I'm not saying the quality of the execution is on par with a movie like Legally Blonde, but it's still not a bad movie. There are worse movies out there. There are worse movies about the male psyche. Don't torture yourself. Watch the Clique.
Yeah. It's also funny because the execution, or like all of our grievances with the movies, are like number 999 in the things that people would hate about the Clique. You know what I'm saying? So like, don't give me that shit that you think like all of the grievances we have with it is why you don't like the Clique. Like, stop lying. Like, you cannot even get to our grievances without loving the Clique. You know what I mean? Like, to get there, you have to understand the rest of the movie.
Yes, spend a decade loving the series and then we'll talk.
So, since it is the end of the year, as always, we wanted to do an end-of-year wrap-up with a list of superlatives. And we'll start with most surprising movie of the TGS year. Would you like to start us off?
Sure. So when it comes to most surprising, we decided we can either go in a positive direction or a negative one if it's warranted. But since it is the holiday season, I figured might as well try to be a little bit more positive. So I am going to nominate Bratz for surprisingly good, because going into it, I genuinely wasn't expecting much, because it was a movie I watched and liked when I was much younger, and given some of my previous favorite movies, I didn't trust my taste. But looking back on it, I think that movie has aged beautifully. It's relevant now more than ever. Overall, it's just such a fun time. So I ended up having a surprisingly good time with it.
I'm so glad.
And I'm curious to hear what your pick is for this category.
There are so many candidates, but I picked Uptown Girls for most surprising for so many reasons.
Interesting.
Well, for one, I was very surprised by how sad it was.
Yeah, you and me both.
It's hard to say if this is positive or negative, which is why I was pretty adamant that this category should stay ambiguous. Like, it's up to you. Because it's like, it's just surprising. Like, there's no really connotation to this nomination for me. Both in good and bad ways. Like, surprising that it was not really that enjoyable. Surprising that it was really solid. Like, all of the things that I liked about it were really surprising. Honestly, that is the movie that I really didn't like see coming, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
If I understood correctly, you were surprised that it was good, and you were also surprised that it was bad.
Yeah.
So moving on to our next category, we have Guilty Pleasure. That's the entirety of our podcast, basically, because a lot of the movies we look at could be considered through that lens as a quote-unquote guilty pleasure. But since we're trying to find merits in exactly those kinds of movies, I think for this category, this is more like a personal estimation of a movie that we still enjoy despite the flaws that it may have. Would you like to start off with this one?
Yeah. Mine is a true guilty pleasure, because lots of movies are quote-unquote guilty pleasures because of how people view them in the context of, like, society. But to me, a guilty pleasure is like, even after we've like deconstructed all of that, it's actually not a good movie, but I like it anyway. And my pick is Friends with Benefits. It's not a good movie, but I love it. I think it's a good movie. Actually, like, it's so offensive. It's very of its time. It's very like, it was funny and quote unquote good in 2010. But I can't let go of how I see it. I guess like the good stuff looms so large whenever I watch it. And I always have a good time. And like, I don't know, like I watched that movie and I'm immediately not a good person and having fun.
No, I totally get that because that's exactly how I felt with Twilight in our first season. I objectively know it's not a good movie, but the feelings it evoked in me based off of my history with the series, just having grown up with it, just overshadowed everything else.
But now that we have uncovered my greatest flaw, would you like to nominate a movie for Guilty Pleasure?
I would love to. Actually, now that I think about it, I wonder what our guilty pleasures say about us.
Oh, God!
Because the movie that I have chosen is Just Like Heaven.
Interesting.
Even though that movie is so incomplete that it's basically like the setup for the movie, but not the actual movie, I still enjoy watching it because I think I'm imagining the story and filling in the blanks as I watch. And so in my mind, it's great because the building blocks are there.
Okay, I don't like how different our guilty pleasures say about us. Because yours says that you're very creative and imaginative, and mine says I'm a bigot.
That's just the way I phrased it to make myself sound better. The truth is, I like bland rom-coms, and I'm not picky about the quality of the stories that I like.
The truth is, Mark Ruffalo is there, so...
True. Mark Ruffalo's in it, that's all I need to know.
So we have a fun category next, and that is our favorite movie of the year. What is yours, Sohini?
Well, this might be surprising, but my choice is The Clique.
Ah.
Not just because I've grown up with the series, but because I think it's a genuinely good movie. And of course, that doesn't mean that, it doesn't have its fair share of shortcomings, which it does. But I really like some of the stylistic choices it makes, which convinces me that they genuinely put thought into this movie and were trying to say something. And just apart from all of that, I think it's a fun time, a classic, really. So that is why I chose it as my favorite.
Yes, it is very good, but for me, it fails too much to become a best movie or favorite movie. The execution is great and everything, but they keep doing the opposite of their message, basically. They fall into the trap of the thing that they were trying to highlight. And I'm like, then you ruined it. I'm so mad at it because it's good. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get it.
So I couldn't figure out where to put it, but it's such a highlight of the year for me. It's a great pick.
Thank you. Now let's hear yours.
It's actually quite similar. Mine is Bratz.
Not at all surprised.
Bratz is The Clique, and it's everything. I just love it so much. It's a favorite for me because such a big part of why I love it is my personal experience with it. Regardless of the fact that it actually is just an objectively good movie, it is also a favorite movie. The one closest to my heart, regardless of quality. Although this one happens to be a very good movie,
Yeah, no movie's perfect, except for the actual best movie for this year, but that's different.
This year, so many movies I'm conflicted about. But something pretty definitive is a worst movie.
I think we're gonna agree on this one.
How about you kick us off then?
I don't think any candidate fits this category better than New Moon. Now I know New Moon is low-hanging fruit, but that's not why I chose it personally. Just looking at the movie on its own, I was so disappointed by how soulless it is, much like Edward. It's sparkly on the surface, but it lacks depth. It spends 2 hours talking at us without actually saying anything. I feel like even the first movie, with all of its flaws, at least made an attempt to have some character, but this one just felt like soulless, sort of destined to be blockbuster, whatever we do kind of thing. And so that's what really disappointed me about this movie more than anything else.
I will say that was one hell of a burn for Edward. But I agree-ish. It's also my worst movie pick. Same as you, it's not because it's Twilight we have to hate on it, because this makes me sound so holier than thou, but I genuinely have zero preconceived notions about it. So much so that I watched this movie and didn't understand a single thing that happened. I must have picked Twilight as the worst movie in previous years too, but it says something that I actually like New Moon better than Twilight, and it's still our worst movie. I kind of enjoyed this movie, but what I liked about it wasn't what they were going for. I really liked watching Bella be like kind of a less than good person, selfish with Jacob's feelings and her father's feelings. The whole movie for me just felt like such a personal story focused on Bella and like these very grounded everyday things, but it wasn't a good movie. The way I'm talking about it makes it sound so good in retrospect.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it sounds like you're praising it.
I hate that this is such a big part of why I hate it, but I genuinely could not stand the acting of a very specific actor in this movie.
Yeah, Charlie could have been better.
How dare you? But yeah, it's just bad, okay? It was just bad. And I'm so sad that it is, because like literally the whole conceit of the podcast is Twilight good? And I'm so sad that the answer keeps being no. And you know what? I doubt that it'll change with the later movies.
I was gonna say, if we do end up watching the rest of the movies, I wouldn't get my hopes up if I were you.
I feel like I'm being let down.
You think you're being let down? I'm the one who suggested the series for the podcast. Let's end this wrap up on a positive note.
Yes. And that note is best movie.
Yeah. I think we're gonna agree on this one too. I'm fairly confident.
I don't think so.
Are we not?
See, I should start first because it needs to end on you, because my pick is wild.
Don't you dare say Mamma Mia.
I picked Mamma Mia.
This is the end of this podcast.
I genuinely think it's really good, and I love it. The end. It's perceived as such a fun movie, but the merit of this movie isn't how fun it is for me. It does a really good job with depicting Sophie and Donna's relationship, but like to me what's impressive about it, it's about motherhood and how selfish Donna can be at times in the name of caring about Sophie, which doesn't make her like a bad mother or like doesn't make her not care about Sophie. Just like that complexity is what's interesting to me. So much of the movie is Donna struggling with her own self-worth and personhood and everything, and projecting that onto Sophie. I love that concept and that story and that theme. It's not even like a wild card because it's not supposed to be there. It's just a wild card because I don't think I've even properly conveyed what makes it so fucking good.
Interesting.
I think we all know what yours will be.
Yeah, I think it's fairly obvious what movie I'm gonna mention for best movie of this year, and that'll be Legally Blonde. I mean, I'm kidding.
That would have been also a wild card.
While Legally Blonde is a great movie, I'm not here to talk about that today. I'm here to talk about the real best movie, and I don't mean of this year, I mean ever. It's Shrek 2. I think it's self-explanatory. It's an impeccable movie. Nothing beats Shrek 2. That's it. Thank you. Good night. It's got humor. It's got intrigue. It's got murder plots. It's got themes about marriage. What more could we want on this podcast?
Yeah, it is pretty great. It's objectively excellent, but I don't know why it didn't like earn a place in my heart. You know what I mean? Like I enjoyed it and everything. I think it's because I was so blown away by the first Shrek.
Nothing can quite replace that first experience watching Shrek and coming to learn about that world and get to know Shrek and everything. So once you're already familiar with that world, returning to it in a sequel is a much different experience. I understand if the impact of the first is much greater in a different way.
Yeah. I'm in the camp of people who like Mamma Mia for the fun stuff, but for Shrek too.
Well, I think that ties things up very nicely.
This has been such an interesting year.
Yeah, quite an interesting lineup we had, I think.
I'm looking forward to our lineup for next year. As we did last year, we're going to take a little break before coming back on, but we will be back in a little bit. Definitely send in any suggestions that you may have for next year. You know, make this year a good one for us. How about that?
We've already had a suggestion for Shrek 3, so looks like we have some more Shrek in our future.
Yeah. Will we have more Twilight though?
It depends on if I can convince Sarah. You will find out.
All right, that's it for our holiday special.
Yeah. If you have any suggestions for movies we should discuss on the podcast, send them in at graveyard_slot on Instagram, the Graveyard Slot Podcast on Tumblr, or email us at thegraveyardslot@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of The Graveyard Slot.